I'm a bit curious more so about your role, because you mentioned earlier that you were a designer, not just a level designer. So what did you mainly do in Little Big Planet 1 apart from level design?
So yeah, it's I think so yeah, we're in at Media Molecule, like we didn't tend to use the word level designers, we use the word designers. And the reason why is because we often did stuff more than level design. So particularly at the early stages of the project, because there's just so much to do, and it was all just very hands on deck about it. It's sort of like, we just do what's needed to be done. But say, for instance, like the 3 layers, like that whole thing, like to begin with, that was that you could have as many layers as you wanted. So and it wasn't even the idea of layers. What you did is you could just sort of draw out the shapes and things like that. We're doing it with a mouse to begin with, and you could just sort of place them wherever you wanted within in Z essentially, and there wasn't even a set sort of depth to how you could make sort of really deep ones. And there was definitely some benefits to that in terms of visuals and things. So there's always this kind of like fight between visuals and the sort of usability of it and all that kind of thing. And so essentially the whole 3 layers thing with the sort of thin cardboard bits in between the thin layers in between it, that happened as a result of a conversation with me and Dave. And Dave was just sort of like, I think he was really keen to simplify the whole thing, because you don't really want to be having to think too much in terms of Z. And so he was like, like the number of layers, could we just make it like 3? And I was a bit like, oh, okay, because obviously some of the stuff we made was dependent on it being much more than that. We had a lot more sort of depth within the scenes and things. And the first thing which I thought was just sort of like, I know that like Kareem, the art director, was really, there was the sort of cardboard, and that was a really core visual to the whole thing really. And it's like, well, if we only have 3 layers, then we've lost that cardboard. You can have the chunky cardboard but not the thin cardboard. And just a discussion with Dave, it was like suddenly we had the idea of, okay, well, could we put the thin ones in between the thick ones? And the key thing being that if you've got a piece here, then you can just stick a bit of cardboard on the front and then put a bolt through it, and that just really worked. So that's one example where like being integrated with the people who make the code and make the system of it, being very working very closely with the designers in terms, because they obviously know what's going to be needed for all the levels and things like that. That was a really a good example of that, and I think it was just the right compromise. I think the usability that we got from Dave's intuition there was absolutely the right thing to do. At the same time, I don't think we compromised too much in terms of the art style. I know that Kareem, you did want some of the things like to be able to be sort of turned a bit in that direction, but yeah, ultimately keeping it like that, I think, was just the right decision. And but there's other stuff too, like for instance the switches in that. Again, that was as within the level design department, it's kind of how do we get more interactivity, because there's so much, because before, like right at the beginning, it was just literally an obstacle course, so you just go plop 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 plop, put down objects and things like that, and then you just sort of run through it. But obviously that there's only so much of that you can do before you start wanting more complex things in terms of challenges and things like that, to go and fetch things or whatever. And so that was just kind of like sitting down and just talking through of like, well, what kind of games would you want to make with this? And it was just kind of then distilling all of those down into individual gadgets. And like Mark Healy, he was absolutely fantastic at all that kind of thing. And but yeah, I remember that there was talk about let's make the switches and things, a second release and all that kind of stuff. And I was absolutely adamant that that would be the first release. And I'm really glad we did. but one of the nicest things about it was that making the when you have an idea in your head of what some of these gadgets are for. So say for instance I think it's called the magnetic key or something, where you've got to attach a key to something in a sensor. If it comes near it, it sends a signal. That was kind of in my head. That was a very a cool way of doing fetch quests or whatever, just being able to detect that kind of thing. But Victor, he just took it to another level and then started making kind of logic gates and things. Like you see it in the end boss in LittleBigPlanet 1 with that little thing in the chest, and it's essentially little pistons and things which move the keys out of the range of the sensor, and so essentially he started making sort of computers in a way, like programmable stuff, not programmable, but made like the ability to do so much more complex things as something which was only intended to as a fetch thing. And that was amazing. That was really exciting.
Yeah.
Actually, with that as well, I kind of wish we'd done this more originally. I was quite keen for when it's almost like in maths lessons when the teacher says show you're working, I was quite keen for those things to be visible, like how everything works to be visible. In the end, we didn't do it as much as I wish, actually. I wish we'd shown it more, because there's something nice about, I think that's what I love about LBP, was that everything you see is real and it works. And that I think there's something very compelling about that. I wish we'd shown more of how it works.